Nebraska's got Dylan Raiola, but is it set to double down on throwing the football in 2024? We discuss next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, good morning, everybody, and happy Thursday. It's already Thursday as we get through this week post Memorial Day. Expecting some TV times today to drop around college football, so we might know some of that. Might touch on that a little bit later on in the show, and certainly tomorrow with a guest that we have coming up as well. But Mitch, I wanted to start with this. You got my gears turning a little bit yesterday. You were a guest on my show, and we were talking about offensive personnel. I mean, specifically, we were kind of going off the conversation we were having on the Locked On Nebraska podcast yesterday regarding Ramir Johnson and the running backs. Yeah, hey, there you go. Put us on the right side there. And it kind of led to a conversation about how Nebraska's skill position strength lies in the wide receiver room rather than in the running back room. And you mentioned how, at least early in the year, Nebraska might try to get established through the air. They have Dylan Raiola. They have some good experienced wide receivers, or at least what we project to be good wide receivers. And so what I did was I went and I pulled some run pass splits and the sack adjusted numbers that go with it for each year of Matt Rhule as a college football head coach. And obviously last year was a little bit different. We'll discuss that in a second. And I think there's a few things that we could take away and potentially predict for 2024. So we have the kind of numbers pulled up in front of us. I know you guys can't see them if you're with us on YouTube or anywhere else, so we'll just give them to you here. But like you look at right away, 2013, would it surprise you if they ran the ball less than they threw the ball? And we're just talking about sack adjusted numbers. In the first 2 years at Temple, that was the case. In all 3 years at Baylor, that was the case. They ran the ball less than they threw the ball. Last year at Nebraska, they ran the ball a lot more than they threw the ball. Right. Probably one of the highest splits in the country outside of the service academies. There were over 60% in sack adjusted run percentage last year. So I don't know. There's a few things we could take away. We could sort of dive into it, but what do you think about expanding sort of on the hypothesis that you put forth yesterday on my show?
Yeah. So Nebraska was right around the same as Michigan in its run pass split last year, but for much different reasons. Michigan did it because it had an overwhelming ground game with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards and a fantastic offensive line. And Nebraska did it because it turned the ball over constantly when it tried to throw and had quarterback injuries and was just trying to shorten the game and give itself an opportunity to be competitive. So that's notable off the bat. The other thing that I take away, or the main thing that I take away from looking at these numbers and the way things have trended for Matt Rhule and Marcus Satterfield and Glenn Thomas, because those guys were there also in Philly and in Waco, is that as they've become established in their roles leading these programs, they have tended to run the ball more just about every year. The only time that they trended in the direction of throwing it more was year 1 to year 2 at Temple, and that was just a 1% drop in the amount of time, the amount of snaps they used to run it. Every other year, year 2 to year 3, year 3 to year 4 at Temple, 1 to 2, 2 to 3 at Baylor, they've always doubled down on the run and gone more heavily with the run. So what should we take from that about Nebraska in 2024? Well, I think they're going to buck that trend, first of all. Definitely. I think Nebraska is going to throw it more than it did last season. But they're not going to go away from the run, because the identity of what this offense is an offense that will want to be more physical as they get entrenched in the system. And Nebraska is going to try to run it, But yeah, there's some specific circumstances that exist with this 24 team that I think are going to make Nebraska look a little different than the trend lines for Matt Rhule in his previous stops.
My takeaway, Mitch, was that I think there's some really there's some stuff in here that really points to. So if you really break it down and you get into those those mid-aughts Temple teams and those Baylor teams, what you'll notice, and I think this was sort of a hypothesis that we had for this year as well, based off that conversation we had yesterday, is that they really prefer to play it as their personnel will decide kind of what run pass split is. They're not going to force something. And so you look at that year that they took the jump at Temple when they had 10 wins in 2015, each of the prior 2 years that Matt Rhule was there, they didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher. They didn't have anything close to it. And then they did in 2015. They had a good running back that they trusted in Jihad Thomas. He ran for almost 1,300 yards that year and 17 touchdowns. So, I mean, going back to our conversation a little bit yesterday, I don't think Nebraska has that this year. I maybe in a really, really positive world, they can find the totals on the ground that gets them to, 1,500 yards or something like that. But I can guarantee you that it's not going to come from one guy. They don't have that type of guy on their roster. So that probably lends them to when they get into positions where they need to make a play. We're talking about third downs and, 3rd and 3s and stuff like that. I think you'll see a lot of what we saw in the spring game, the kind of quick pass RPO stuff, using that as kind of an extension of the run game, because the strength of this offense is in the quarterback and the wide receivers, and it's not in the running backs.
Yeah, when Dylan Raiola gets the ball in his hands and he can deliver it quick to a tight end or a fullback or a running back or a receiver in certain sets, as you said, that's an extension of Nebraska's run game, and those numbers are going to go down in the pass column. But this offense is different than what he had at Baylor and Temple. It's got some RPO elements to it, and those short passes, those are RPO things, but it's more pro style because of who Dylan Raiola is. And it's interesting to note that at Temple and Baylor, he started with young quarterbacks, and as they grew more experienced, that's PJ Walker and Charlie Brewer, and as they grew more experienced, you didn't see a big increase in the number of pass attempts that those teams produced. It was more doubling down on the run. And yeah, that's about the maturity of the offenses that they were in charge of. And it's about giving themselves the best opportunity to win in those leagues and what they wanted to do just in general offensively. So while Nebraska absolutely is going to be below that 60% number with the amount of time that it runs the football in 2024, that's Dylan Raiola's offense. That's this quarterback's the way these quarterbacks will work. It's not going to be some dramatic revival of pass happy Nebraska that we saw in 2007. No, this is a team they're going to strive for balance, and most of those numbers at the previous stops, were in like the run numbers were in like the low to mid 50%. And I think you're going to see Nebraska strive to get to that place with a freshman quarterback where they throw it maybe 47 to 49% of the time.
I think you make a great point about just the conference that they're in as well, and just the situation around them. It's another good example of Rhule and his staff's ability to kind of adapt to their situation. I mean, 2019 at Baylor, they won 11 games, and you look at sort of how the splits came through from a rushing perspective. That Charlie Brewer was their leading ball carrier that year, and he was their quarterback. He wasn't their leading rusher. And then they had really 2 or 3 running backs that they used outside of that. Jerry Bohannon was another quarterback who played a lot. He ran it too. So they had multiple quarterbacks, and then JaMychal Hasty, who had a nice career in the NFL, and John Lovett, who they both ran the ball that year for him. They could do it kind of in a variety of different ways. I think what part of what has burned Nebraska at times in the past is they've had coaches who have been so dedicated to one thing, whether it's being tied to a scheme or just an idea before the season of like, hey, this is a player who I really want to feature this year and who we have to get the ball. And I think it's come to their disadvantage at times, but this staff is they've shown really no signs of that in the past. They'll go with their best players, they'll give the ball to their best players, but it's not like they're going to be chained to them at any time.
If they can get to like, what do you think, sack adjusted rate of passes at like low 50s?
Yeah, I think you want to probably.
Is that like the key to success for Dylan and the Huskers?
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like you can run it that well, as long as that pass number doesn't stray too high, if you feel like you can run it that well where you're close to even, that's where where they can achieve it. I think that's where they could be really good.
Yeah, it's probably close to 50-50, I think. I'm looking at these numbers, and at Temple they trended a little higher on the run. Even though the numbers always tended to go up with the run, they were more of a running offense at Temple. They were sitting in the 50s at Temple by the time they had success, and they were in the high 40s at Baylor. Maybe Nebraska, the sweet spot is like as close to 50-50 as you can get. I think that's probably the way the Big Ten works, and playing to the strengths of a Big Ten system. And I think also with the, especially with a young quarterback this year, maybe in year two for him, they're closer to like 50, 53, 54% with the pass. But it's an interesting thought project here at the end of May to think about what Nebraska might do with those numbers. And it started because we were talking about the running backs and trying to find some definition in that room. And I like where you went with that conversation. Something to watch for sure, that I think is going to be indicative of the direction of this offense in over multiple years, and also the success that Satterfield and Thomas have in year one with a freshman QB, presumptively. So after the break, we're going to talk a little bit about Troy Dannen and a move that he made this week that opened some eyes on Wednesday. That is coming up next. I want to take a minute to tell you about Gametime, a sponsor of the Locked On podcasts. We've been discussing the ease with which you can use Gametime to get tickets to a Major League Baseball game, but how exciting would it be, Connor, to go to a game in the NBA Finals? I know you would like that.
Extremely.
Yeah, well, they start a week from today. The Celtics await the winner of the Dallas-Minnesota series. The Mavs lead 3-1. Dallas is an easy flight from Nebraska, or maybe you're listening to this episode in Texas or near Boston or in Minnesota and hoping that the T-Wolves can come back after winning on Tuesday. So start thinking, too, about Gametime, because it makes getting tickets to the NBA Finals easier and faster than any alternative method. Prices on the Gametime app go down the closer it gets to tip. Take advantage of great last-minute deals, all-in pricing, see views from your seat. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, welcome back. So on Wednesday, I received a press release from the University of Nebraska Athletic Department about a contract extension, 4 more years for John Cook. We have not talked about volleyball much on this podcast, probably, Connor, because we started doing this in April, and right now it's May.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about it at least for a minute now. We're going to talk about John Cook. So he is 68 years old. This deal will pay him $825,000 annually. That makes him reportedly the highest paid head volleyball coach in the nation. There are some private schools that don't report their numbers, so we don't know what the coaches are making at Stanford, USC, places like that. But as far as the public schools, he's making more than Texas coach Jarrett Elliott now. So I'm sure that his 825 number had nothing to do with paying him more than the Texas coach. But it does take him through the 2028 season, when John Cook will be 72 years old. Nick Saban, incidentally, retired in the past year at age 72. And Saban is a coach that Cook mentions often, or at least he has in conversations that I've had with him. So, but the real reason I want to bring this up is because of the retention clause in Cook's contract that will pay him $70,000 if he's coaching the Huskers on July 1st, 2024. So do the math. That's like a month from now.
Yeah.
Odd timing for a retention bonus, no?
Yeah, well, not if you continue to read on in the press release. Honestly,
I didn't read on. What did it say?
Oh, okay. So there's a quote in here from John Cook, and I'll just read it to you guys. I'm very grateful to Troy and our administration for their support and confidence in our Husker volleyball program. When Troy and I talked about my contract, I proposed that instead of an annual escalating salary that some coaches do, it would mean a great deal to me if the Nebraska Athletic Department would consider supporting me in purchasing a horse out in central Nebraska that I've had my eye on. The horse is named 415, was born and bred at the famous Pitzer Ranch in Erickson, and is a once-in-a-lifetime performance horse. He was purchased as a weanling by Mark Ray and then trained by the Ray family. Troy loved the idea. While they couldn't specifically write that into my contract, the retention bonus will be used to buy number 415. I'm honored that Troy was supportive of my idea, and it means a lot to me. We're all looking forward to what should be an exciting season.
Okay. He's had a horse in the past. There have been many horse references around the Nebraska volleyball program over the past couple of years. John Cook, in his 60s, developed a love for horses and riding horses and like the rodeo lifestyle. He's a cowboy. But this is a new level. He now receives $70,000 from Nebraska to buy a horse, number 415. The horse is going to probably need a new name, I would think, if this thing is going to be trained like as a racehorse. I want to see John Cook at the Kentucky Derby with, I don't know, like 5 rings, they can call it, or something like that. He's got 4 national championships as the coach at Nebraska. I'm sure he wants to add another one, but or more than one. But this is, hey, this is what you do, right? This is cool. This is Nebraska volleyball embracing its the passion of its iconic head coach and buying him a horse. I don't know what else to say about it.
I walked in the Devaney Center last year for, I think I was doing I was doing like I think I was PAing for like a gymnastics event or something like that. And I walked in one of those back doors, and there sat John Cook's motorcycle that he rode out that one time. Was that now that was before volleyball day in Nebraska. Where was it, Mitch, where he had that big Harley motorcycle? I can't remember when that was, but
I don't know. I remember Ted Carter on a motorcycle, but I don't remember John Cook on a motorcycle.
Maybe it's Ted Carter. I saw
not surprising. Not surprising.
It was sitting in there, and I thought, man, this is really John Cook's house. This is John Cook can do whatever it is he likes, and if he wants it written into his contract that he wants to use the bonus on specifically buying a racehorse, then we will make that work for you. It's all pretty earned because, you know, like you said, John Cook is one of the best in the country and an important like figure for the athletic department too. So you got to keep that guy happy.
Can you buy a racehorse for $70,000? I mean, is that like, I'm curious if that gets you a good horse or
probably get you a slice of the pie. You know, you got to go in with some other people.
Okay. Yeah. I figured like the best ones would be 6 figures for sure. But so yeah, maybe he can be a part owner, something along those lines. I don't think he wants to like bring this and raise it at the Cook Ranch in Wyoming. They're going to train this thing. Somebody's going to train this horse to win some races. But okay, so final thing on this topic. What do we think, Connor, that this tells us about Troy Dannen? Because all we've learned so far, or the main takeaway from Troy Dannen's time at Nebraska so far, is that he is very budget conscious and wants to attempt to cut costs through the Memorial Stadium renovation project, cut costs and increase revenue around the stadium. That's been his big move so far, is the way that he scaled that back or changed the timetable, changed around the process of the Memorial Stadium reno. And here he is locking down the volleyball coach for 4 more years, the most successful coach who's at Nebraska today. And he got creative in finding a way to do it.
Yeah, I think cut costs certainly has been, the number one thing that we've been able to see on paper so far. But the other thing that has come with a lot of this, including the John Cook announcement, is that he seems to be incredibly serviceable to the coaches that he employs. Like he's saying, "Hey, we're going to do everything. I'm the new guy here. We're going to do everything we can to keep you happy because we know how people feel. I know how people feel about you around here." And it was the same thing about with Matt Rhule too. So even though there was no contract extension in there, I think those two were going to have a really good relationship. And Dannen has been a servant to the coaches that work at the University of Nebraska. I think that's a pretty primary takeaway so far too.
I feel like if this had happened with Trev Alberts, like he would have been, he may have, and Trev was the ultimate volleyball supporter. Volleyball day in Nebraska happened because of Trev Alberts. So let's just say that I'm not doing revisionist history here and saying anything about his support for volleyball. I don't know that Trev would have been as much into the horse clause in the contract. It might have been more like he's just a little more buttoned up than that, don't you think? I think it might have been like, John, we'll give you $70,000 as a signing bonus. You can buy a horse if you'd like, but please let's not make that part of the announcement that we put out.
Press release. I wonder if you go back through all the press releases that you've ever received from Nebraska, how many of them include the word horse? It's probably like that might be the only one ever.
I think so. I mean, they don't have an equestrian team, so yeah, I think so. All right, that's enough horse talk.
Yeah.
After the break, we are going to get into some Nebraska baseball. Huskers are headed to Stillwater. So if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today delivers can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, back here finishing things up on a Thursday. Tomorrow we will continue in our series of guests. Let's keep the tease out there. Let's keep the mystery out there. But it'll definitely be football heavy, and it'll be involving some news that drops today around the country. So there you go. There's your tease for tomorrow. But let's finish today by talking about Nebraska baseball, who also will play tomorrow at the Stillwater Regional. They are in as the 2 seed. Of course, they'll play Florida. They're looking to advance out of a regional for the first time since probably since
2005.
Yeah. And they'll have a borderline All-American pitcher to do it. And Florida has it's funny looking at the kind of rundowns. Florida's a good team. They are in the SEC. They had a top 30 RPI this year. We've talked about their pitching struggles before. They're going to throw a freshman out there who's got a 5.83 ERA. They've been piecing that together all year long. And, Friday won't be any different for Florida. So, I mean, it's an interesting start for Nebraska. Getting off the ground 1-0 is really, really important to start that regional.
This is something you see sometimes in the SEC with teams that aren't like top line SEC programs where they just either bash their way through or do it with depth. Like usually if you go into a regional and you're playing a mid-major program or a team that's not in the SEC and a huge name, you can pretty much expect that you're going to see a big time arm on a Friday on a regional opener. And Liam Peterson, the right-hander from Florida, he may have a big time arm. I don't know the scout on him too much other than that he has improved, that his numbers are better than his season long numbers of late in the SEC. But, usually even if you're playing, you can be playing a 4 seed and there's been times like that in the past for Nebraska, but they've got one guy who can really go out there and is like, the conference pitcher of the year, and you're going to have your work cut out for you. A little different task with Florida, and Nebraska has its work cut out for it for sure. But it's more about keeping the baseball in the yard, and when it's on, when it's pitching, when it's on defense. So, one note about Oklahoma State's O'Brate Stadium: it is an absolute launching pad. 2 years ago, when the Cowboys hosted a regional in Stillwater, they had Arkansas, Missouri State, and Grand Canyon into town, and there were 41 home runs hit in 7 games. Arkansas beat Oklahoma State 20-12 in the winners bracket game, the 1-0 versus 1-0 game. So that sounds kind of like a slugfest, right? Well, a day later, Oklahoma State beat Missouri State 29-15.
I remember that.
They broke the NCAA postseason record for runs in a game. Are we gonna enjoy watching the baseball this weekend?
You have to prevent it from becoming too much of a home run derby, and there's only so much of that you can control. Obviously, I mean, I think for pitching, is if you admit to yourself that, hey, some balls are going to fly over that fence, and it might hurt a little bit, you try to make them hurt as less as, in the least way you possibly can. That means solo home runs. If you're giving up solo home runs, you could survive, you could win this weekend. But if Nebraska pitching is, if they get into that 3rd or 4th game in the regional and they're walking guys and they can't get the ball over the plate, and all of a sudden here comes the grand slam, that's been the story for Nebraska in regionals the last couple times they've been in them. So
Oklahoma, right? At Oklahoma.
At Oklahoma State, it was at Bricktown in 2019.
Yeah, it was Oklahoma State that did it.
Yeah, Trevor Boone hit it into the scoreboard, and then of course Charlie Welch 3 years ago in Arkansas as well. I believe that was a grand slam too. So
that's some PTSD right there, huh?
It really is, like these absolute, like, heart-wrenching home runs that drive in 4 runs. So keep yourself out of the doorstep of that situation, and you'll have a chance to be okay. But if Jack Caglione decides to fly 500 feet and it's a solo shot, you could forget about that and move on.
Right. And Nebraska has been big. It has been a strikeout. Its pitching staff has produced a lot of strikeouts, set a Big Ten record for strikeouts in a single tournament last week in Omaha. So the more that they can throw strikes and keep runners off base, the better they are. And obviously the more unlikely it becomes that opponents are hitting 3-run homers and grand slams against the Huskers. Florida, incidentally, has hit 116 home runs this year. That's 7th nationally. Oklahoma State, playing half of its games in the stadium, has hit 111. So just 5 fewer than the Gators. Nebraska, meanwhile, is at 66th. 66 home runs. That ranks 126th nationally. And the Huskers have allowed a relatively low number, 59. So the job for Rob Childress, Nebraska's pitching coach, in going to Oklahoma State this weekend is to work whatever kind of magic he's got to keep the numbers low. Nebraska will have a much better chance to win lower scoring games than those that get up in the 10 and over category.
So I think, so you said Nebraska has 66 home runs.
Yes.
Jack Caglione himself has 29.
Yeah.
And he hit 33 last year. So, you keep that guy limited as much as you possibly can. And, you got a chance. Obviously Florida's a dangerous team top to bottom, but that's the head of the snake for sure.
Well, Josh Caron hit 6 for Nebraska last week, so that's about 10% of what you've done on the whole year was one player at the Big Ten tournament. So, one quick note on Nebraska baseball to finish up before we close the show. I have a story out on The Athletic today. Check it out. I talked to Jeff Lizey, who was a figure in Nebraska's great run a generation ago, and we talked about Will Bolt, who was a teammate of his, and how Will Bolt and Jeff Lizey and so many others from that era were able to capitalize off momentum generated at the conference tournaments. 3 times Nebraska ran through the conference tournament after losing its first game, just like it did last week in Omaha. So there's a formula that Bolt and Childress are familiar with in how to use that to their advantage, where they just spend a ton of time on the field starting the week before the NCAA regionals, and have found a way in the past to parlay that into great runs in June, and 3 times they ended up in Omaha. So we'll see what this team can do, and if it can recreate some of that magic that Dave Van Horn built 25 years ago.
Excellent. So they've checked some boxes so far. Looking forward to that story. All right, we'll come back tomorrow, and we'll have some good stuff for you with our Friday guest lineup hitting its 5th straight week, I believe. Right, Mitch?
I think that's right. Yes, that is correct.
All right, we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. But first, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV, in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Find Locked On Sports Today. It's available now on the free Fire TV channels app.